I guess we could officially start. Um, uh, just welcome to the second gathering of Shakespeare for today. As you know, we'll be discussing rape and the limits of language in Titus Andronicus. I'm Eric DeBarros, Assistant Professor of English here at ODU, and my co-facilitator today will be Leah Anasato, a sophomore English major and a student athlete. So what I think I'll do, if I'll read the description that I emailed, that's okay. And then Leah will start us off with the first close and cross-historical reading. We'll read and analyze 3 passages, ask some questions to take us beyond the text, and then just open it up to a general discussion. Okay, so with that, let us consider what is perhaps the most disturbing series of events in Shakespeare's first and bloodiest tragedy, Titus Andronicus. After vowing revenge against the Roman general Titus for his irreligious post-war execution of her son, her eldest son, Tamora, the defeated queen of the Goths, begins her vicious quest to that end by allowing her 2 remaining sons to rape Lavinia, Titus's only daughter. Tamora's one condition, what matters most to her, is that they remember to make her sure, that is to murder her once they're done. Of course, they forget. Instead, perhaps as if to suggest that the inability to communicate is itself a kind of living death, they cut off her hands and cut out her tongue. In one sense, this gruesome attempt to trap their crime inside her raped and mutilated body fails, for like the classical character she's modeled after, she resourcefully and even heroically manages to communicate what has happened to her through a desperate engagement with one of the most popular school texts in Shakespeare's time. However, in another more pessimistic sense, the awkwardness of her engagement with that text, as well as the struggle of her male relatives to make sense of her suggests that there is something more to, perhaps something unrepresentable about her mutilated presence. In that way, Lavinia haunts the rest of the play because her mutilated presence graphically raises difficult questions about effective and accurate communication, questions which the seeming effortlessness of traditional verbal, textual, and manual communication obscures. This month's gathering will examine Lavinia's struggle as our own, as students, as teachers, as colleagues, as friends, as enemies, as citizens, etc. In sum, communicating across our perceived and real differences of privilege and pain is extremely difficult, if at all possible, especially in an election year wrapped up in a global pandemic. So in the process of close reading the attached examples of Shakespeare's ironic and disturbing representation of this problem, we will do our best to imagine for ourselves ethical ways of bridging those frustrating, haunting, and often painful gaps in understanding. So with that, Leah will start us off by reading the first passage, and then what we'll do is we'll alternate. But Leah, before you start, let me just make sure people aren't trying to get into the room, because my email is, as you could hear it, I think. Okay. Give me a second. Let me send a link. A couple students are trying to get in. So let me forward the link to them.
Okay, and I'm not looking at my phone. I just used it to pull up the text you sent. So okay. I have it, yeah.
I believe that should work. Okay, so let me share then the text and we will continue.
That's the PDF. Oh, okay, great.
Okay. So Leah, would you like to start?
Once again, just thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to talk about communication and language. It's one of my favorite topics. And let's jump in. Tamora, kneeling. Stay, Roman brethren, gracious conqueror. Victorious Titus, rue the tears I shed, a mother's tears in passion for her son. And if thy sons were ever dear to thee, oh, think my son to be as dear to me. I just want us to notice here that she's trying to make this connection with Titus through their shared parenthood, and that she's trying to express her pain and sorrow through this connection. Suffice it not that we are brought to Rome to beautify thy triumphs and return captive to thee into thy Roman yoke, but must my sons be slaughtered in the streets for valiant doings in their country's cause? Oh, if to fight for the king in commonweal were piety in thine, it is in these. And this is her again trying to reach Titus, trying to say that even though they're different nationalities in different countries, they have this connection, they have this sameness, and she's trying to appeal to his ego as a military conqueror. Andronicus, stain not thy tomb with blood. Wilt thou draw near the nature of the gods? Draw near them then in being merciful. Sweet mercy is nobility's true badge. Thrice noble Titus, spare my firstborn son. And we just see this continued desperation to make a connection to reach Titus, and we see her once again playing up to his ego, associating him with being godlike and being applying to his immorality, and trying to say that being godlike and this through religion, godlike is merciful, and she wants to use that to try to get him to be merciful to her in her plea.
So as we move on, Titus's response gives us the first indication of the way language, the limits of language, or the way language fails. So he begins, patient yourself, madam, and pardon me. These are their brethren whom your Goths beheld, alive and dead, and for their brethren slain religiously, they ask a sacrifice. To this your son is marked, and die he must to appease their groaning shadows that are gone. And so what we found striking about that is his adherence to, we might call it an orthodox adherence to religious custom, right? That he expresses a view of religion that perpetuates difference, opposition, and conflict. And so what we initially wondered, what are those beliefs, those customs in our society that prevent us from making connections across perceived and real differences? So that's one of the questions already for us to think about. And if I can, I'll just end that for you, since I have pretty much already analyzed that. You have Tamora concluding, oh, cruel, irreligious piety. So there's the way in which Tamora, ironically, she becomes the villain in the play, but at this moment, she's the one that's able to identify precisely what's wrong with Roman society. It's this adherence to this religious orthodoxy that prevents people from hearing the suffering or being sensitive to the suffering of others. Leah, did you want to say anything else?
I just think that also, kind of like we talked about before, but in our discussions before, Tamora is kind of representing the view of a doctrine or religion that is accepting and is more fluid, and that could potentially, seems like it would be a model for what would cross the bridges and would have led to a connection. But Titus's response, being rigid doctrine and beliefs, created conflict.
So for the next passage, is that me? Am I reading that, Leah?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So this scene, Act 3, Scene 1, And this is when things have flipped, right? This is when the process of Tamora's plot working, and two of Titus's sons have been condemned to death. And now he's the one in the position of pleading to the political establishment to forgive, to pardon his sons. So it begins for us with the description. And because language, at least in the dialogue, is such a problem in this play, the scene directions become really important. So we have enter the judges, tribunes.
Move up your screen. We're still seeing Act 1, Scene 1.
Oh, good, thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you. So Act 3, Scene 1, we have enter the judges, tribunes, senators with Titus' two sons, Quintus and Marcius, bound, passing on the stage to the place of execution, and Titus going before pleading.
Hear me, grave father, noble tribune, stay, for pity of mine age, whose youth was spent in dangerous wars, whilst you securely slept, for all my blood in Rome's great quarrel shed, for all the frosty nights that I have watched, and for these bitter tears, which now you see, fill the aged wrinkles in my cheeks. Be pitiful to my condemned sons, whose soul is not corrupt as 'tis thought. And I think that we also notice the similarity in some of the words that he's using that Tamora uses earlier. She was talking about the tears she shed, and now Titus is in exactly the same position. Exactly. He's in a similar position to her, pleading for his sons and referring to his sorrow and his pain.
I'm sorry, if I could just add, it's also interesting that he's specifically appealing to his military sacrifice, his service.
For 22 sons, I never wept, because they died in honor's lofty bed. Titus Andronicus lieth down, and the judges and others pass by him. For these tribunes in the dust I write, my heart's deep languor and my soul's sad tears. Let my tears staunch the earth's dry appetite. My son's sweet blood will make it shame and blush. And I think this is interesting too, because there's this like implication that the dust and the earth will receive his tears and his sorrow better than the judges or the tribunes even can. They will hear it. His tears and all his pain goes to the earth because the people won't hear him. They won't heed his plea. And it just raises like this question of what is it in our society that gets in the way of making these connections between people, be able to express our pain and sorrow. What things stop us from being able to express our sorrow and pain and make connections?
Right. So as we move on to our final scene, and this is the scene that I describe, I think, most thoroughly in the description of the raped and mutilated Lavinia and her desperate attempt to communicate what's happened to her, right? So who starts that, Leah, in terms of—
Move it up. Move up the chair.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I'm like the control room here.
We need it.
We should hand it over to you, right?
No.
I believe I read from young Lucius, and you read the introduction.
Okay.
Stage scene.
So enter Lucius' son, young Lucius, and Lavinia running after him. And young Lucius flies from her with his books under his arms.